Hello everyone, it's finally time for a new Olympian Nights devlog. So around the time of the last devlog, I pretty much had a somewhat working combat system in place. However, it was kinda buggy and it really didn't feel comfortable playing. In fact, to me the combat system just felt kind of awkward and unresponsive, choppy even. And I could improve this slightly by, for instance, changing the way the character gets rotated, adding an extra attack animation for attacks that get triggered from a running state, and improving lock-on. But I think one of the main issues were the way I control the animations and the animations themselves. I mean, just look at this attack chain, it really just doesn't look good. And I remember at some point I kinda just lost motivation for the project, so I tried to go into Blender and at least work on some map ideas for the game. And then I just felt like modeling some guns in Blender, at which point I even started a completely new Unity project for a shooter game. And I even got some cool shit like bullet drop and travel time working using raycast, or hitscan as probably most people call it. But eventually I just started taking a long break from everything related to game development. Luckily my motivation came back not so long ago, and finally I did what I should have done long ago, which is reworking the whole animation system. But before this I actually redesigned the characters, by giving them sort of their own unique clothing, and some of them even got new hair. This is Zeus before the redesign, and this is him now. This is Poseidon from before, and this is what he looks like now. This is Hecate, how she looked before, and this is Hecate now. And Hecate's weapons also got an overhaul. When it comes to Hades, I'm not yet satisfied with his redesign yet, so I'll probably put some more work into that. Anyways, this is what he looks like now, and this is what he looked like before. And when it comes to rigging, this time I made the weapon part of the character rig, which I honestly should have done from the start, but I think I had some issues on Unity's end there, which I luckily figured out by now. But yeah, having the weapon as part of the character rig is kind of essential, since otherwise you can't really animate the weapon independently from the hand, which is something you want to be able to in a game like this. I then retargeted some walk and run animations from Mixamo to my character rig, which was a huge pain in the ass by the way. Then I modified the retargeted animations, so they'd work with my character holding its weapon, and this way I don't have to mask different animations on different body parts in Unity later on, which would technically be easier, and it was the way I did things before, but I think I get better results doing it the way I do it now. Since using different animations on different body parts often led to some weird looking behavior. This however meant that I also had to make some holding block animations for each of the 8 directional walk animations, but at least you can teabag with your weapon now. And even though I didn't intentionally add teabagging, I think it adds a more responsive feel to the game, since the player can now blend between block and idle animations instead of having to wait for an animation to actually finish before it can go to the next state. I also changed some stuff in the movement logic, like your walk speed is now reduced if you hold block, and also your run speed is reduced a little if you try to run backwards or sideways. So when I finally got basic movement to work with the animations, I started working on a new attack chain for Poseidon, and even though it still looks somewhat choppy, it's a huge improvement compared to the old animation chain from Poseidon. Like, this is his old attack chain, and this is the new one. I then set it all up in the animation controller in Unity, and this time I actually managed to get it all on one layer, except for one of the abilities, which we'll get into later. I've now also made it so that if you're at the end state of an attack and transitioning back to idle, that transition can now be cancelled by an interruption source, which would get triggered by starting another attack. And this should also make things a lot more responsive, since now you don't have to wait for the transition to finish before you can start with the next attack animation. I also rewrote most of the combat scripts, made them a little bit cleaner. However, they mostly work the same way they did before. I also fixed the get up animation from Ragdoll, since that one had gotten kinda snappy, but now it's nice and smooth again. At this point I decided to do another test session just to see how things worked out, and how the gameplay feels at this point. On a side note, I now made the Olympian Nights development Discord server public, so if you're interested in the progress of Olympian Nights, feel free to join. You can even become a tester if you want. For that you just have to DM me on Discord and I'll probably give you a key. Just keep in mind the game is still in a very early stage, so don't expect too much yet. Also remember to wishlist Olympian Nights on Steam if you haven't already. It's free and it can potentially help the game out massively when it releases. Okay, let's move on with the devlog. So when testing, as I expected, there were a few issues. Like hit detection was working pretty randomly, and sometimes block didn't work, or you'd get stuck after trying to parry. I luckily managed to fix most of these issues in the following days though. I then added a UI indication for dashes. The way this works, the inner circle is the delay between dashes, and the outer circle is the dash cooldown time. And if the inner circle is not grayed out, that means you can dash. And I'm honestly pretty happy with how this turned out. I then started re-adding abilities. I got the pull ability working pretty easily, but with the Trident Throw there was some funny business going on. At least now Poseidon can throw the trident with the prongs going forward, and not like it was before. But as you can see, the movement of the trident is a bit weird sometimes. Sometimes it even felt like the trident was bouncing off another player if you throw it at someone. The way the throw works right now is when you throw it, it's somewhat controlled by physics forces, but when it returns it just interpolates towards the player's hand again. And I'm kinda thinking of just doing interpolation all the way through, to avoid like weird physics behaviors. I also had a funny idea to make it possible that other players can jump up on your trident when you throw it and like fly with it, but I'll have to see how much time I'm willing to spend on that, but it technically shouldn't be too hard. Another issue with the trident throw is I wanted the player to be able to move freely while throwing and catching the trident, and to achieve that I had to mask the throw animation upon their walk animation by using two different animation layers. And as I said earlier, I'm trying to avoid doing this since it often gives weird results and buggy behavior. One simple solution to this would just be to not let the player move freely while throwing the trident and while catching the trident. However, I could probably still let the player move somewhat freely while the trident is flying. But feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comments. When it comes to Poseidon's spin ability, I'll still have to remake the animation, and I'm thinking of giving it to some other character instead, and give Poseidon some water ability instead. I'm thinking of something where he can for instance spawn a small wave, which he can use to ragdoll other players, or maybe even trap someone inside a water ball for a certain duration. Kinda like Dumbledore did with Voldemort in the Order of the Phoenix, I think it was. And I even thought of giving him something like an ultimate ability where he just spawns a giant tsunami or something. But for any of these ideas to work, I need to make some good visual effects for this, and honestly I'm getting a headache just thinking about it. I mean, so far I have this water ball shader, but I can't seem to get the transparency working for this, since either the terrain or other objects get rendered on top of the sphere, or the sphere gets rendered through other objects, and neither of those is really what I want. After the next test session, I realized the combat still kinda doesn't really feel the way I want it to, although it still is a major improvement compared to the old system. And hopefully with some more fine-tuning I'll get something satisfying out of it. Some of the things I definitely should do is improve the interpolation of remote lines, since right now it sometimes really looks a bit snappy, especially if you run alongside the other player. This almost looks like the remote play position is interpolated at a different rate than the local player, which technically shouldn't be the case, but I'll have to look into that. Another thing I definitely should do is make the stamina more visible, like when you're close to running out of stamina, maybe turn the stamina bar red or something, since right now you often don't notice when running out of stamina. I think I'll also play a bit around with the parry system, since right now you can technically just spam parry, and just by doing that you can often cheese a parry when the other player eventually starts attacking. And what also often happens is that both players just try to predict each other and both just parry and no one attacks, which I mean, it looks kind of funny, but I'm not sure if I want the combat system to be like that. I'm actually also thinking about, like, just for the fun of it, trying to do a Battlefront 2-like approach. Since in Olympian Nights right now, the hit detection doesn't start before a few frames into the attack animation, since I think that makes more sense than in Battlefront, where the hit detection just starts as soon as you press the attack button. However, it would still be interesting to see how that would feel in Olympian Nights, and it really shouldn't be too hard to swap between the two. However, if I do this, I'll probably also try to make it so that attack animations can be cancelled by deflect animations in order to have a Battlefront 2-like parry system as well. I'll probably still don't use it like this in the end if I get this working, since I kinda want my own system and don't just copy Battlefront. But I think it will still be fun to play around with it, and in the end I think the most important thing is that the combat system feels satisfying, so I'll try to go with the approach that just is the most satisfying. Now, a lot of people have been asking me about the release date of Olympian Nights, and it's honestly way too early to say anything about that. It could be in 1 year, it could be in 3 years, I have no clue. Like, it just depends on so many factors, like how much free time I have, how much motivation I have, my efficiency, how many issues I end up having. However, my plan right now is to get all the current 4 characters working, all with their own abilities and stuff, and with a satisfying combat system of course. And as soon as I am at that point, I would try to make like 1 or 2 somewhat good looking maps, get some sort of matchmaking to work, and at that point I would probably try to go into early access. But it's still hard to say how long that will take. Okay, with that being said, thank you all for watching, remember to smash the wishlist button, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!